On September 13, 1982, Grace Kelly, the American actress who had become a real-life Princess of Monaco, was driving her 11-year-old Rover 3500. With her in the passenger seat was her 17-year-old daughter, Princess Stephanie. They were traveling down the winding, cliffside roads of the Moyenne Corniche, a notoriously beautiful and dangerous stretch of road overlooking the French Riviera. In a bizarre twist of fate, it was the exact same road, made famous in the opening chase scene of her own 1955 film, To Catch a Thief. That day, she wasn't acting. The danger was real. As they approached a sharp hairpin turn, the Rover didn't slow. It didn't turn. Instead, it accelerated, smashing through a low stone retaining wall and plunging 120 feet down a steep, rocky embankment. The car flipped multiple times before coming to a violent stop in a resident's private garden. First responders rushed to the scene, pulling both women from the mangled wreckage. Princess Stephanie was conscious, suffering from a hairline fracture in her neck and severe shock. Princess Grace was unconscious but alive. The initial aftermath was chaos and confusion. Rumors swirled. Had Stephanie, who didn't have a driver's license, been behind the wheel? Had the brakes on the old car finally failed? A witness, who had been behind them, claimed the car was swerving erratically for some time before the crash. The truth, however, was far more tragic and random. Doctors at the hospital discovered that while driving, the 52-year-old princess had suffered a major stroke. It was a sudden, catastrophic medical event that caused her to lose consciousness instantly. Her foot had likely slumped onto the accelerator, causing the car to speed up and fly off the cliff. Her injuries, particularly to her brain, were too severe. The following day, with no hope of recovery, her family made the heartbreaking decision to turn off her life support. The world mourned the loss of a Hollywood legend, whose storybook life came to a terrifying end, not from a simple driving error, but from a silent, internal failure on the very roads she had once made famous on the silver screen. Sometimes the most terrifying dangers aren't the ones you can see. What's the most shocking story of a medical emergency causing a disaster that you know? Now, let's move on to the next story. The 24 Hours of Le Mans, June 11th, 1955. It was the golden age of motorsport, fast, glamorous, and terrifyingly dangerous. The track had been designed for cars with top speeds of 100 miles per hour, but the new Mercedes-Benz 300 SLR, driven by Pierre Levegh, could reach 180. The grandstands were packed shoulder to shoulder with over 250,000 spectators, protected by nothing more than a small earthen mound and a thin wooden fence. There were no seatbelts, no roll cages, and no real safety barriers. It was a disaster waiting to happen. On the 35th lap, driver Mike Hawthorne in his Jaguar D-Type suddenly braked hard to enter the pits, cutting in front of a slower Austin Healey driven by Lance Macklin. Macklin swerved violently to avoid the Jaguar, moving directly into the path of the much faster Mercedes of Pierre Levegh. Levegh, approaching at over 150 miles per hour, had no time to react. His car struck the back of Macklin's Austin Healey, using its sloped rear as a ramp. What happened next was pure carnage. Levegh's Mercedes was launched into the air. It somersaulted and struck the earthen embankment, which acted like a second launching pad, sending the car airborne directly towards the packed crowd. As it flew, the car began to disintegrate. The heavy engine block, the front suspension, and the radiator broke free, flying into the spectators like cannonballs, crushing dozens instantly. But the most horrifying part was the hood. It tore off the car and spun through the air horizontally, slicing through the dense crowd. Survivors later described the horrifying scene as the hood decapitating tightly jammed spectators like a guillotine. Pierre Levegh was thrown from the car and killed on impact. The rest of the car's chassis, made of a magnesium alloy, slammed back down and immediately burst into white-hot flames. Firefighters, unfamiliar with magnesium fires, tried to douse it with water, which only made the inferno more intense. In total, 83 spectators were killed, and over 180 were injured, making it the most catastrophic accident in motorsport history. In a truly chilling decision, The race organizers never stopped the race, fearing that a mass exodus of spectators would block the roads for incoming ambulances. The cars kept racing past the burning pyre for hours. This disaster single-handedly caused several countries to ban motorsports for decades. It's a brutal reminder that the pursuit of speed without safety leads to carnage. What safety feature in modern cars do you think is the most important? And let's get into the next story. On the evening of February 3rd, 2015, Ellen Brody was driving her Mercedes SUV home in Valhalla, New York. Traffic was heavy and she found herself stopped inside a railroad crossing area as the crossing gates began to lower. The gate came down and struck the rear of her SUV with a soft thud. Witnesses said she got out of her car, looked at the gate, and then, for reasons that remain a mystery, she got back in her vehicle. Instead of reversing off the tracks, she drove forward, directly into the path of an oncoming Metro North commuter train. The train, carrying 650 passengers, was traveling at 58 miles per hour. The engineers saw the SUV and slammed on the emergency brake, but it was far too late. The train collided with the SUV in a massive explosion of metal and fire. But the initial impact, as horrific as it was not what made this crash uniquely deadly. The force of the collision was so immense that it dislodged the electrified third rail from the tracks. The third rail is a massive, heavy bar of solid steel that carries 750 volts of electricity to power the train. As the train continued to move forward, it pushed the now broken rail ahead of it. The rail buckled and shattered into long, spear-like sections. These massive electrified steel daggers were then forced upwards by the train's momentum. They pierced the floor of the first train carriage and shot through the passenger cabin like giant white-hot javelins. The scene inside was apocalyptic. The rail sections tore through seats and passengers alike, impaling people and instantly setting the interior of the car ablaze. The combination of massive physical trauma and high-voltage electrocution was catastrophic. Panicked passengers in the burning, smoke-filled car had to break windows to escape. In the end, Ellen Brody and 5 passengers in that first car were killed. The investigation concluded that the unique and deadly result was caused by the third rail design, turning a common type of collision into a horrifying event where the track itself became the weapon. A single moment of hesitation or confusion can have consequences you could never imagine. This tragedy shows how quickly a normal commute can turn into a nightmare. Subscribe for more in-depth looks at the events that shaped our world in the most unexpected ways.